Before I start this story, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Because the story you're about to hear is one of the strangest, most confusing, and honestly one of the most intense moments of my life. Sometimes a single moment can change everything. One moment you're living your normal life, and the next, something happens that completely shifts the way you see a person forever. And for me, that moment happened in a sauna with my stepbrother. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let me explain how everything led up to that night. Because nothing about it was planned. Not even close. This whole story really started about 2 years earlier, when my dad decided to remarry. At the time, I didn't think much about it. I was a teenager back then, busy with school, friends, and trying to balance a small part-time job. My life was already full of distractions, so the idea of my dad starting a new chapter with someone else didn't feel like a big deal. His new wife, Isabella, was actually really kind. She wasn't the stereotypical stepmother people joke about. She was patient, warm, and surprisingly easy to talk to. She never tried to replace my mom or force some awkward family dynamic. Instead, she simply tried to fit into our lives naturally. But Isabella didn't come alone. She had a son. And that's how Liam entered my life. Liam was only a year older than me, but he had this confidence about him that made him seem older. He was tall, athletic, and carried himself like someone who was comfortable in his own skin. But what really stood out about him was his personality. From the very beginning, he treated me less like a stepbrother and more like a friend. We joked around constantly. We teased each other about stupid things. And surprisingly, we got along almost immediately. You know how some blended families struggle with tension or rivalry? That never really happened with us. Instead, our relationship became something different. Something easy. Something natural. Fast forward 2 years. By then, Liam and I had grown incredibly close. We studied together, played games, shared inside jokes, and sometimes even hung out when we didn't have to. People would often say we acted more like lifelong friends than stepbrothers. And honestly, they weren't wrong. So when Liam suggested that we take a week off at the family cabin, I didn't hesitate for even a second. School was about to start again. Life in the city had been stressful, and a quiet place in the woods sounded perfect. The cabin was one of Liam's favorite places in the world. It sat deep in the woods beside a calm, beautiful lake. Far enough away from civilization that you could truly relax, but still close enough to a small town if you needed supplies. I had only been there once before, during winter. Back then the lake had been frozen solid, and the trees were covered in thick white snow. It looked like something straight out of a holiday postcard. But in summer, the place felt completely different. The lake sparkled under the sun. Birds filled the morning air with sound, and the whole place felt alive. The first night at the cabin was peaceful. We unpacked our bags, threw some burgers on the grill outside, and sat on the wooden deck watching the stars appear one by one in the sky. The conversation was easy. We talked about school, friends, future plans, and random nonsense that didn't really matter. Liam had always been easy to talk to. He had this balance between confidence and openness that made you feel comfortable around him. By the time we finally went to sleep, I remember thinking something simple. I hadn't felt that relaxed in a long time. The next day was unbelievably hot. Not just warm. The kind of heat where the air itself feels heavy. We spent most of the morning kayaking on the lake, racing each other across the water, and laughing like idiots. By afternoon we were exhausted. So we decided to take it easy. That's when Liam made a suggestion. Let's use the sauna. Apparently our parents had installed a new sauna behind the cabin earlier that year, and Liam had been excited about it ever since. Personally, I wasn't so sure. Saunas always seemed less relaxing and more like sitting inside a giant oven. But Liam was enthusiastic. Trust me, he said, throwing a towel over his shoulder. It's the best way to relax after being active. His excitement was contagious. So eventually I agreed. The sauna was a small wooden structure tucked behind the cabin. It blended perfectly with the forest around it. Inside, the heat hit immediately. Thick. Heavy. Almost overwhelming at first. We sat down on the wooden bench, the warm wood beneath us, while the heater crackled softly. For a while, neither of us said anything. Just silence. Peaceful silence. After about 10 minutes, Liam finally spoke. "You know," he said quietly, "this used to be my favorite place growing up." I glanced at him. He didn't usually talk about personal things. "Whenever stuff got crazy at home," he continued, "I'd come here and just sit for a while." His voice sounded softer than usual, almost thoughtful. "I can see why," I replied. "It's peaceful." He nodded slightly. "Feels like the rest of the world disappears." As the minutes passed, I started to relax. The heat stopped feeling overwhelming and became strangely calming. But something else was happening too. Something subtle. Something I couldn't quite explain. At one point Liam shifted slightly, and his arm brushed mine. It was nothing. Just a brief touch. But for some reason, it sent a strange jolt through me. I told myself it was just the heat. Nothing more. Still, the atmosphere in that small room began to feel different. Heavier. Charged with something unspoken. Eventually I broke the silence. "Do you ever miss how things were before?" I asked. Liam opened his eyes. "Before what?" "Before our parents got married." He thought for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But not in a bad way." Then he smiled slightly. "Honestly, I think we got lucky." "Lucky?" "Yeah," he said. "Blended families can be a disaster." He nudged my shoulder playfully. "But instead, we actually get along." I nodded. He wasn't wrong. But after that conversation, the silence returned. Only now it felt different. Every small movement felt amplified. Every moment stretched longer. At one point Liam looked at me and asked quietly, "You okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just hot." He laughed. "That's kind of the point." But even as he joked, I noticed something. The way he looked at me. Not strange. Just different. And suddenly I became painfully aware of how close we were sitting. Eventually the heat became too much for me. "I think I need some fresh air," I said. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The contrast was shocking. The cold breeze against my overheated skin made me shiver instantly. The lake was completely still. The stars above reflected perfectly on its surface. For a moment I just stood there trying to clear my head. But my thoughts kept returning to the sauna. To Liam. To that strange tension I couldn't explain. Eventually the night air became too cold. So I went back inside. Liam was still there. Sitting exactly where I'd left him. He opened his eyes when I walked in. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. Then he said something unexpected. "I think we should talk." Liam looked directly at me. "You've been acting different tonight." I tried to deny it. But he shook his head. "You're a terrible liar," he said with a small smile. Then his expression turned serious. "I've noticed something." My heart started racing. "What do you mean?" He hesitated before answering. "The way you look at me sometimes." I didn't know what to say. Then he added quietly, "And it's not just you." The silence that followed felt endless. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. But the tension between us was undeniable. Finally he stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. Like he was giving me time to stop him if I wanted. But I didn't. And in that quiet, heated room, everything changed. When we finally stepped outside later that night, the cool air felt different. Everything felt different. We walked back to the cabin without saying much. But the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Heavy with things neither of us fully understood yet. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the entire evening in my head. Every conversation. Every moment. Every choice. And I kept asking myself one question. What did this mean for us? The next morning, things weren't awkward the way I expected. Liam acted almost normal. Playful. Relaxed. But something had definitely changed. We both knew it. We just didn't talk about it. And as the days passed at the cabin, we settled into a strange new normal. The memory of that night stayed between us like an invisible thread. Unspoken, but impossible to ignore. Even now, I'm still not completely sure how to feel about it. Part of me thinks it was just a confusing moment. Another part of me knows it meant more than that. So I'm curious what you think. Were we wrong? Or was it just two people caught in a complicated situation? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more true stories like this. Because trust me, I have a lot more stories to tell.